and welcome to this webinar. This is your moderator, Subbu. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your location, and welcome everyone to this series. We have been frequently doing webinars as part of the Cynozip series, and we have been bringing experts, customers, and alike to do the webinars for us. And thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to attend this webinar today on this important topic that is very, very relevant and current in today's world that we are in. And I promise you that your time investment will be worth it. So with that, the topic on hand we have today is remote clinical trials using blockchain. May sound a little mouthful, but Rama, our guest speaker, is going to make it very easy for you.
Sabu, we
So
seem
the current
to have
COVID
lost
situation
you.
has
We can't
shown
hear
the
you.
importance of clinical trials.
Sabu?
The clinical trials are
Sabu, we can't hear you. Rama, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Rama.
Jill, can you hear me? I can't hear Jill. So let me just go to something that's happened in the chat. I lost that.
Okay. Are you able to hear me, Rama?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I think we still have the audience with us. So I'm going to continue.
Rama, can you hear us? Oh,
yes,
there you are.
You.
Okay, Sabu, we lost your audio for a few minutes.
Okay. Okay, I'll start off with the topic. So the topic on hand today is remote clinical trials using blockchain. And as we all know, the current COVID situation has shown the importance of clinical trials. The clinical trials are constantly going on from various companies to find a vaccine or a solution for the current COVID situation. Clinical trials software is ready for change. And technology should not be the driver, but the business problem should be. You don't know. So there are many moving parts in the clinical trial process, and how Blockcube solution is going to make it easier is what we are going to see in our discussions today. So before I introduce our guest speaker, let's see who's in the audience today. Jill, do you want to share poll results? Thank you. So the level of understanding is about 50% of the audience knows quite a bit about the topic. And roughly about 40% knows a little bit about clinical trials. Thank you. Next one. Okay, so this is the results that you see for the level of understanding with clinical trials. We have about 15% experts and about 30% competent on the clinical trials, and about 30% is new to the clinical trials, what it is. The last poll, from which business area the audience is. So IT is majority, over 50%, little over 50%, and on the business side, we have about 40% of the people. So this is a good mix of technology folks and business folks that will help tweak this, the content that Rama is going to talk. So it's a good feedback for him. Thank you. Thanks for taking the poll, really appreciate it. So now so great that we have some good information about how we have to tweak or place this presentation. So let me introduce our speaker, Rama Rao. A little bit about his background. Rama is the co-founder and CEO of Blockcube. He founded this company a little over 2 years ago to bring innovation and technology to clinical trials using blockchain and distributed applications. Rama is a seasoned executive and has worked with brand name companies in the pharmaceutical industry, especially in the pharma value chain for benefits of patients. As a CFO, he has led complex operations in different business environments in multiple countries and was responsible for handling big budgets for these companies. Rama has always looked for building things that are simpler using lean methodologies, bringing innovation and streamlining processes. Functionally, Rama has covered FP&A, licensing, mergers and acquisitions, IT, sourcing, the whole 9 yards of end-to-end business, running a business for a pharma company. So we are all eager to find out what Rama has to say and discuss today. So over to you, Rama.
Subbu, thank you very much. A quick sound check. I assume everybody can hear me and there's no issue there. And firstly, I'd like to say how honored I am that Cynozip is hosting this session for two reasons. One, of course, our partnership is, of course, something which is very valuable. But even more importantly, I think what the COVID-19 situation has really shown us that patients are the heart of whatever we should be doing, and is exactly the reason why we are working in this problem space. So thank you, and thank you all to the audience for finding time in your busy schedules to attend. What I'd like to do is to talk to you a little bit about the whole structure. And what we do in this structure is to, I'm just trying to move my slide. The agenda really, what I'd like to cover is at a very high level, the aspect of blockchain, then talk about the Gartner hype cycle, given the hype around blockchain and clinical trials, and then talk about clinical trials, then what does this mean in the current COVID environment, and then talk a little bit about our solutions and the future. Now, normally, having led large systems projects, I know we should never talk about technology or solution first. But given the composition of the audience, I thought I'd share a little bit about at a high level what blockchain is all about before going into specifics regarding the problem area and the solution. Given the audience, I really wanted to mention that blockchain really is the software of trust. This is a quote attributed to Dr. Alex Kahana, who is the Chief Medical Officer of Consensus Health, looks after the geographical area of EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa. And also, we are very fortunate he's an advisor on Blockcube. And the fundamentals of trust, though they change over time, they also have critical factors that never change. And that's the challenge that software solutions try to address. Now, if you take a look in the blockchain world at a 60,000-foot level, around 2008, a seminal paper by a person who was titled Satoshi Nakamoto issued a paper on Bitcoins. The reality is nobody knows whether it's a he or a she or a group of people. So let's just assume for a moment the person exists, but the paper has been of seminal value. And it has basically spawned a whole industry more recently than in 2008. So as such, the technology is not quote unquote new, but the applications have really exploded in the 2015-2017 time period when Bitcoin came into prominence with all its hype associated with it. 2018-2019 has seen the maturation of apps moving more out of the finance domain to other domains, especially supply chain. And now healthcare has also come into the limelight, and those options are also being built. So for a general audience, if you're asked what is a blockchain, it's not easy to discuss it. So I'll try to make it into a very simple structure. And let's assume we were working with baseball cards or with marbles, technically an asset. And then say there are 3 players and you can see each other. So let's say in this case, there are 30 marbles each person has. A loses 5. So the person ends with 5. They start with 10 and end with 5. Now A has lost 5. So let's assume he loses 3 to B. So B has gained 3. So B will have 10 plus 3, 13 marbles. And he loses 2 to C. So C has got 10 plus 2 marbles or 12. The total remains the total. Now let's assume for a moment all 3 players are on different continents and they don't trust each other. So automatically you need an intermediary, a judge, referee, or whoever, in order to see that when a winner wins something, the loser transfers that asset. Now, assume you want to go to the next step where you want to eliminate the judge or the middleman or the referee. The question then comes up, how do you build a trustworthy system which allows everybody's gains or losses to be credited correctly? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what blockchain is all about. A distributed ledger system which helps to record in a trustworthy manner using software and anchored by cryptography so that these transactions can take place. And the reality is, beyond Bitcoin, other digital assets have been looked at. And technically, any asset can be digitized and traded or tracked. But the question we also have to ask ourselves is this necessitating a blockchain solution? Diamonds, cars, stocks, certificate data has value. Bitcoin is the first. And then after that, there were solutions like Ethereum that came in. And just as internet in the 80s exchanged data and even continues to do so, and information, blockchain has become the software which will allow us to exchange assets or digital assets. The number of companies that are in the blockchain healthcare space has exploded also. And this is not an exhaustive list, but there are those in the infrastructure, those building middleware, and those that are focusing on consumers. Consumer-driven blockchain solutions are more for personal health records or identification. Middleware is like with Blockcube, where you're building a healthcare solution, in our case for clinical trials, but there are others who are building it for other reasons, like medical chain for healthcare records, or like Factum for medical records, and others for supply chain. And then, of course, there are others who are building enterprise-grade technology to take it forward. One of the most, yes?
Just 1 second. I just wanted to mention to make a request to the audience. I request the audience to type in the questions in the question box on their panel. So that way I can bring it up for Rama to address these questions as and when required. So feel free to type it in and let us make this interactive. Only with your questions we can make this interactive. Thank you, Rama.
That's a great point, Subbu, that it's very helpful to know the questions because the slides cannot put all the answers together. But if I understand where somebody's coming from, hopefully I can address that also in the course of this. So feel free to interrupt me anytime. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
So now moving on to what is Hyperledger. Hyperledger was basically quarterbacked by Linux. It's open source software. It has some of the who's who of the software industry associated with it, like IBM, like Microsoft, Intel, etc. And what they basically have done is different sort of blockchain-driven software to manage the whole blockchain environment in an easy way for somebody who is a solution provider, like what we are working on. And one of the earliest use cases has been in supply chain, partly because, in the pharma industry, for example, they really need to know where drugs are coming from, but also because of pioneering effort by Walmart to trying to track down from farms levels on where the products are there selling to customers. The question that comes up often is that why is a distributed ledger or a distributed database like a blockchain superior to existing models? And here are 5 reasons that I think are critical to be kept in mind. One is that you can integrate silos. The second is the data is immutable. Basically, what happens is when you enter any data into a block in a blockchain, you really cannot quote unquote erase the data. And once multiple blocks have been created, you cannot also fraudulently go back and change that data. And the reason is that all the blocks are anchored in a blockchain with cryptography. And that itself makes this thing, let's say, censorship resistance or single vector cyber attack resistant. As many of you have seen in the popular press, there have been debates about, is our COVID-19 mortality figures correct? Are the testing figures correct? If that had been entered into a permanent auditable record like a blockchain provides, it would make a difference. And finally, there is a concept of individualization also here, which basically means that you create a distributed digital asset where the person who creates the asset potentially can own it for life and can monetize it. So let's say, for example, you've got a musician who's basically built a track. After the first downloads, you know, he or she can then set up a blockchain-based system where everybody who does a download fractionally monetizes it, like say gives 1/10 of a dollar as the charges, which really is being picked up in a way like organizations like Spotify or YouTube or who have what have you. Um, this sort of personalization allows a much broader degree of monetization for digital assets. So the Gartner report, which most of you are aware of, is a very respected report, and they have a hype cycle report. And in a way, the report encompasses what Professor Christian Catalini of MIT basically said, is that the potential is very high, the value is real, but the challenges are also equally challenging. And with any emerging technology, you got to separate the promise from the probability of success. So Gartner creates its hype cycle, curve, and what really happens is that there is on the y-axis the expectations, on the x-axis the time, and there is basically the innovation trigger. As all the innovations go forward, then it goes into a peak of inflated expectations, and then after that there is a trough or disillusionment, and then there is a slope of enlightenment. So these are terms that are trademarked and basically Gartner has built, and they give examples of how different technologies have gone down the cycle. And blockchain in healthcare, or blockchain per se, also follows this cycle. Um, so before I go to clinical trials, the question might come up that where does blockchain in healthcare fit in, or where does blockchain per se fit in? So if you look at the whole area of Bitcoins, that's really in this whole trough of disillusionment. A lot of people have seen associated with fraud, with cybersecurity issues, etc. And recently, you may have seen also that Twitter accounts of very, major leaders got hacked. Uh, Now, if you then go to something like blockchain in healthcare, this is actually at the very early stages. In fact, the Gartner report suggests that it is, only having about 1% penetration at this stage, which for an entrepreneur like me is great news in a way, because it just shows how much growth potential it has. While the thorns, of course, remain, which is creating customer acceptance as you go through the process. Then you really get to something like patient records. For example, I've lived in 7 countries and my records are all over the place and are in multiple languages. Imagine if you could have your medical records all together. So if a doctor is trying to decide what medication he or she wants to prescribe for your cholesterol issues or diabetes, they will then take a very simple access to your records that belong to you to figure that out. And this is the reason why, coming now to clinical trials, I want to.
Rama,
Yes.
We have a couple of questions from audience. Is it a good time to bring it up?
Please. Yeah, it's a good time.
So, first question is, what are the difference between Bitcoins and blockchain? You touched upon Bitcoin quite recently in your discussion.
So let me answer that. That's a great point.
Bitcoins and blockchains.
Yeah. So the first thing is Bitcoin is built on a blockchain structure, but all blockchains are not Bitcoins. So what Satoshi Nakamoto basically did is that he said that here is the mathematical puzzle. If you solve the puzzle and then broadcast it on the network of quote unquote miners, others solving the same problem, and if your problem is first and it's accepted, as a mathematical solution, then you will be able to get rewarded with 1 Bitcoin. And this normally was taking roughly 12 minutes to 12 or 13 minutes each time, and then that block was being added. So in the Bitcoin solution, they've got a very clear consensus mechanism, which basically says, let us all agree that this mathematical solution is right. And it's a bit like saying, okay, I've got 40 dice and I want to roll all 40. And what is the probability I'll get, say, 46s? And the person who solves that mathematical problem gets a Bitcoin. Blockchain, on the other hand, is basically saying that Bitcoin is one application of it. And similarly, there are applications like tracking bananas in Walmart or tracking counterfeit medicines which are being shipped to Africa from, let's say, people, in different countries. So the blockchain there is basically being used to create a digital asset where you understand exactly where it has originated, and that certificate remains with that asset all through life.
Very good. Very good. The next question is, you showed the picture of Hyperledger as part of your solution.
Yeah.
So why would you choose Hyperledger? And
so
are there other options?
that's a great question. So for example, there is Ethereum. The financial community felt that Hyperledger did not deliver what they wanted. So the Wall Street banks got together and created something called R3 Corda in order to meet the regulatory standards, the processing standards. Where Hyperledger comes into its focus is that you got some of the big guys like IBM, Intel, Microsoft collaborating to create a software solution, which makes it a lot more convenient and comfortable for a large organization to implement. Now, there are other players who are building their own private proprietary software. But in my view, it goes back to a little bit, and I'm going to date myself here, when personal computers came in and there was IBM's personal computer and other personal computers. The joke was that nobody gets fired for choosing an IBM computer. So Hyperledger has come into a lot of strength because of its applicability and usability and ability to integrate into enterprise grade systems, scalable and structured. Does that answer? And if there is any interest, we've developed actually a 10-question framework to decide when to use a blockchain and what options you may have through that process.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you. And I would encourage the audience to please type in the questions, and I'll bring them up as we move through the presentation. So back to you, Rama. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'll come to what clinical trials. So, the whole thing around clinical drugs is a very complex process, and it takes a lot of time. And because it takes a lot of time, there's a good reasons. So first, you're trying to develop the molecule, and that's basically the R&D part, technically research part. And that takes anything 1 to 3, 4 years. As you've seen in the current vaccines race, the vaccines that people are developing are not something new, but they're trying to modify what has been developed earlier also. In some cases, they're building new drugs. Then there are what is called preclinical studies, and this takes a year or two. And what happens is you're testing the molecule that has been developed either in a test tube or in an animal. And the benefit of that, of course, is that you see whether the molecule works, doesn't work, and what are the side effects. Once that is cleared and the FDA approves it, or whichever, the European regulatory or the Japanese regulatory agency approves, then you can start clinical trials. And in a clinical trial, normally done in humans at this stage, is where goes through multiple phases. So a phase might be where you're trying to understand its safety, another could be its efficacy, and then finally it all comes together in a phase 3 trials where you have maybe 1,000 people in which you test it out. So for example, a lot of press has been coming out right now. So let's say you take a look at the COVID vaccine being developed by Oxford Biotech. They started on the process when they had very good results in 8 monkeys. Now they basically finished phase 1 trials where they've given it to healthy patients, and they're seeing, yes, antibodies are being developed. And soon they'll be going to phase 2 and then to phase 3, where they'll actually be testing it in actual patients. The whole process is like fairly complex, and we go from 10,000 molecules or compounds down to one which is get commercialized. So in the operational part, what happens is that you may have patients or subjects who may come to a site, to a doctor, who, based on a very strictly approved protocol or a scientific uh, structured, will then select and screen them. And once they've screened, they become quote unquote randomized. The whole essence of a clinical trial then revolves around that let's choose a sample of patients. And hopefully when we test a product in that sample, those results will be typical of the entire universe. And so biostatistics plays a huge role in terms of determining the parameters of the trial. Now, in the trial, the person is given a drug, the diagnostic checks, and there are other things that happen. So you've got monitors who are monitoring every phase of it. And then, of course, you got to pay people in that whole process. And then you start filing it and doing the record keeping. And you all may recall the recent disaster where Lancet, a leading British journal, and New England Journal of Medicine had to force the authors to retract a study on hydroxychloroquine because the data was not right. So data integrity is a huge issue over here. And this has been borne out in COVID-19, where there is, in my view, a tectonic shift taking place. Firstly, the organization being forced to be less risk averse and basically try new technology. And because of patient safety, a lot of companies have paused trials. And their strategic focus has gone to vaccines and cures. But regulators have not diminished the responsibility and importance of respecting patient safety. So obviously, patients cannot come to sites for trials when there is a COVID pandemic. So the question remains, how do we conduct it in the future? So in this site-based process is being turned on its head to a patient-centric process, where through telemedicine, a doctor might reach out to a patient. There's different trial protocols to protect the patients. Remote monitoring is used to a greater degree. And where necessary, a nurse can visit and make the home visits. And then if there's imaging required or biotesting like urine analysis, blood, you go to your local, Quest laboratories or what have you. So it's basically changing the whole model and the paradigm by which it is being done. So what have we done in Blockcube is to build a solution for it. But the question comes up, why is it now? And the reason is that there's a leading organization called Viva, which is one of the best in the industry. And they did a survey and they found that 99% of people are unhappy with existing systems. And they had issues with financial management and issues with study management reporting. And these are some of the parameters they suggested which should be done. And so when we were building our solution, we automatically integrated most of these into our solution. So Blockcube is basically an integrated clinical trial management financial system used for drug development, where we have leveraged distributed ledger and cloud-based electronic data capture so that it gives the clinical development and healthcare professionals an ability to conduct trials faster and, most importantly, deliver data in a real time and being immutable. So what then happens in this case is Blockcube comes in using the blockchain solutions to help and reduce the number of intermediaries required for monitoring. And we developed also a module, a financial module that also does payment processing in this whole process. So the pain point that we are tackling through this is that their data is delayed. There are siloed systems, the data integrity issues, there are multiple intermediaries and delayed payments. So I've talked earlier on with the issue at Lancet when the study got retracted. But if you take a look at systems also, there are a huge number. The data is delayed, which is a bit like I would describe like if you drive a car Somebody tells you what is the speed at which you're driving a day later and how much gas you're consuming maybe a week later. So there are multiple points of issues in this. And what Blockcube basically does is, because of its distributed ledger blockchain-based solution, and coupled with the iPad and the cloud, is able to give real-time data and integrate multiple systems. So at the end, the patient is the beneficiary. In addition, with the financial module, we have speeded up the whole process of payments and accounting reconciliation as we go along. So what have we done here? What we've done here basically is done remote monitoring, and the remote monitoring is basically bringing the clinical trials to the patient. Then it's a decentralized system. So what it does is it consolidates previously siloed components. By being distributed, we are able to let supervisors govern the trial through a remote location without losing data fidelity or integrity. And finally, we brought this together in order to pay people, also the doctors, faster. There is a white paper published by the Society for Clinical Research Sites in the US, which talked about it takes about 3 to 4 months for physicians to be paid and sites to be paid. And obviously, they said that, look, we want to be paid within a month's time. So we have basically tackled and provided a solution for that. So we had a beta test that was done. This was basically validated our promise. It was really great because we captured the 150 patients' data in 12 days. And we did a second one with 65 patients, 6 hours. We've had a virtual certification done by Health Innovation Technology Labs of New York. And we believe we have created a very robust, patient-centric, intuitive system for professionals to use. And what I'll do at this stage is I'll just take a short detour and play a 1.5 or 2-minute video, which shows exactly how that works. So I hope you can all see this thing. This was the beta test done in India.
The self-care practices among diabetics in urban and rural areas of Puducherry, India. We created an innovative app to assist doctors at Indira Gandhi Medical Institute and Research Center called as Blockcube. We charted from Puducherry to Ambalam, placed almost 16 kilometers away from Puducherry. And now it's time to start the study. With the field's performance and usability in mind, we designed the Blockcube app. And this was our field test too. To enroll a patient in Blockcube, their mobile number needs to be verified. A verification code is sent to their mobile phone to accomplish this. By playing an audio file, a physician and Blockcube app ensures that the patient understands the purpose of the study. The Blockcube app records a patient's consent in their own voice, followed by their signature using Apple Pencil. Most of the patients consented and participated in the study. Few of them, like this gentleman, refused to participate in the study. On the other hand, the study progress is available to supervisors in form of a dashboard monitored remotely from Puducherry. They can see geolocation, study status, informed consent, and patients who need immediate medical attention based upon their health scores. In just 12 days, we completed the study on 150 patients. This study data can be exported from Blockcube app in a coded CSV format and can be imported into statistical software, thus fulfilling our promise to accelerate clinical trials while managing them remotely.
Very good.
So the bottom line is that this is a classic case where we took our trials into 150 houses. And this was done in December last year, so it was a pre-COVID environment. But imagine today, when a patient cannot come to a site, we can take the trials to the patient, protect the patient as our regulators want, and still continue with the efficiencies of a cloud and iPad-based system. Now, clearly, the iPad is the system of choice. The iOS was the system of choice here, but it obviously translates itself to an Android-based tablet also. And this is why we believe that our innovative system is one that can potentially offer bridging solution for studies that are paused and take a remote trial faster. And we think that this is most likely to be the first actual blockchain-enabled clinical study done in the world. Um, and if you need more information, you can obviously see that also on our Blockcube website.
Very nice.
This is the reality, to be honest. There are just such a great plethora of choices, but the very choices can be challenging because each of these silos potentially creates a point of disconnect. And what we have tried to do is bring many of the systems together and basically become another virtual trial software system like Science 37 or Medable that you see below.
Mhm.
We've applied really the lean methodology to build our product. We started off with the project ideation 2017, and then we built an MVP. That MVP then went into beta test last year, and now we are almost ready with a commercial version, our version 2, which is going through validation checks, testing, and will be ready for rollout very soon in the next few weeks. And then what we've also got are some very integrative, innovative advances planned in the future. And it's still too early, but we've got a very clear roadmap ahead for our product build. At a very
Rama, would you have time for a couple of questions?
yeah, please go ahead. Please
Okay.
go ahead.
Great, thank you. So one question from the audience is, you showed earlier the complex process of clinical trials. Is Blockcube solution addressing all these steps in one chart, this complex trial process?
So the answer is, for the ones that we have shown in this pain point, the answer is yes, we are. At the same time, there are some more, but going back to the lean methodology, we are focusing on specifics over here. So we are not looking at protocol design. We are doing site selection startup. We are not doing patient recruitment or drug supply logistics, but we are in the operational management. We do plan to do it in the future, and but at this stage, we have been very focused on what we want to do and what we can do and what we should do.
Okay, very good. And another question is, we are all the time we hear about hacking. International, sometimes national, sometimes international, from countries like Canada, UK, Russia, whatever.
Yeah.
Is blockchain hackable at all or not?
So that's a great question also. One of the beauty of blockchain-based solutions is because of the cryptographic linking of the blocks in which we are storing the data, that is not hackable. And even today, whenever hacks have taken place in the Bitcoin, it has not been on the Bitcoin as much as the wallet or on the storage of it, more than anything else. Now, even when malware attacks have taken place, they've asked for Bitcoins to be paid. But the popular notion that you cannot track down a Bitcoin is not entirely correct, because the FBI tracked down on the Silk Road a bunch of drug smugglers, etc., who were using the Bitcoin for very nefarious activities. And not just tracked them down, they jailed the guy who was responsible. And I think the guy's schooling his heels in a prison in Colorado. And the FBI just swept away the whole hoard of Bitcoins the guys had created, and may well be one of the largest Bitcoin owners going around. So the data integrity is supreme over here. What we also must note, that let's assume for a moment you're doing a trial at 5 sites, and let's say country A has got weak cybersecurity and somebody attacks it. The benefit of a distributed ledger is that because each node is having all the data, the hacking at one side will not stop the progress of the trial or the destruction of the data, because the data has already been replicated and kept at the other nodes. So both in terms of protection as well as operational execution, it offers a far more robust solution compared to existing centralized data lakes or databases.
Very good. Before we let you go back to your presentation, one more question we will take. If you're doing clinical trials at multiple sites, can a supervisor keep track or tab on all the progress at each in each clinical trial using Blockcube solution?
Yeah, so that's actually how we designed it. So in that clip that you saw, 17 kilometers in India is like 60 miles in the US, in terms of infrastructural constraints. So the head of community medicine was basically watching how the trials were taking place in her dashboards on a daily basis, and the data was coming to her on a real-time basis. So she was actually very happy and very satisfied by it. Not only was she seeing the data flowing through, because of the geotagging that we put on the dashboard, she could see actually which houses and which patients the study coordinator had visited. So there's no way the study coordinator could sit at his or her home and just fill up a bunch of questions. These were real patients that they could relate. So the remote monitoring in a situation like this where you don't want to be exposed is of tremendous value, which is coming together not just because of the blockchain, but also because of the cloud solution that links up and permits it.
Right.
And of course, a very efficient dashboard.
Excellent. Thank you. So I want to thank the audience for the questions, and I would encourage audience to continue when inputting the questions as we move through the slides. Back to you.
Perfect. And so I'm coming to how our architecture is. This is a very high level. We've created personae, or the people who are the stakeholders. Then the data comes as an electronic case report form, and that is stored in the Hyperledger blockchain. And then, of course, we got audit modules, etc., to keep track of what is happening. And I want to give a special shout out to the team at Cynozip who have been our partners, who've just done a brilliant job in converting the vision that we had into a product that is seeing reality. And what I've really appreciated is that their professionalism and their passion has been second to none. And I've been very impressed by how they have taken a new topic and have run with it. And they've been really joined at the hip. So I've not seen them as quote unquote an offshoring or quote unquote an outsourcing partner, but folks who are very integral to the blockchain development proposed by Blockcube. So thank you, Cynozip.
Thank you. Thanks for your compliments, Rama. And we are excited to be part of your journey too.
And so this is how, moving on to how the dashboard, coming back to Subbu, your question. So the person is seeing the patient enrollment history. They're seeing all, if they're serious, AE stands for adverse events, SE stands for serious adverse events. So that basically allows the person monitoring the trial on a remote basis to say, suppose there's a person has a heart attack and has to be rushed to hospital. That will be classified as an AE event. And so then the person who is monitoring and supervising at a remote location can pick up the phone and say, well, explain what happened and intervene. The second one was driven by a community health screening clinic for cancer, etc. And there what we demonstrated is we could even give the real-time data by hour in the whole process. So we covered 65 patients using 8 iPads in 6 hours. And that was also a phenomenal experience of how it's coming together. So now, in the interest of time, going now to what the future holds. And to me, one of the things that is very exciting is under the CARES Act, digital dollar has been expressed as an option. And a white paper has already been issued. And this is what Christine Lagarde, who is the head of IMF, said a few years back. And in effect, there could well be a scenario where people will prefer virtual currencies. And if that day comes, I want to say that we are 80% there or 90% there to make that happen. And it's not like the US did not have this. Mr. Bullard, who's from the Reserve Bank of St. Louis, pointed out that pre-Civil War, there were tons of privately issued currencies which existed, and that then went off to the dollar. So with that, I'd like to, close and open it up for other questions. And once again, thank you for listening so patiently on what is a very deep and complex subject.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks, Rama, for.
Excuse me, Sabu, can I interrupt real quick? Rama, we had 3 other polls that we wanted to do. Do you want me to do those real quick?
Yeah, that's right. Please.
Okay, and this is again just to get a good grasp on our audience. But how are you satisfied with your current clinical trials management system? Are you either satisfied, neutral, or dissatisfied? Awesome, thank you. So with that one, we have the majority of the people are neutral. We have a little bit of people who are satisfied and a very small percentage who are dissatisfied. And then, are you currently conducting clinical trials in this COVID environment? Excellent. And so with this, we have mostly no, but then everybody else is split between yes and just a few key trials. And then lastly, how are you continuing your trials that have been paused? Are you bridging the software, using existing CROs, using newly developed software? So this is, the majority of the people look like they're bridging the software, but then we have an even split between using existing CROs and newly developed software.
Got it. So let me just tee off on those 3 questions because they're great questions. Thank you, Jill. So in the first category, which is basically, what is the impact? Generally speaking, data suggests that if you could accelerate clinical trials by even a day, you could gain up to, $5 to $10 million in NPV. And even more importantly, if you are in a competitive market, like let's say, as all of you have seen today, the TV ads are filled with psoriasis drugs. So assume you're a psoriasis drug developer. So the earlier you bring it to market, the better and faster it is, both for patients and for you commercially. Then talking about bridging solutions, what Blockcube does offer with its system is a bridging solution because it's pretty agile and light to set up. And if a trial has been paused and the existing software cannot take it up because patients have to come to the site because it's based off a computer or what have you, then the iPad-based solution that we have with the existing cloud makes it possible for you to continue with that solution and continue with getting and recording data from the patients. Obviously, the caveat is if the study drug or whatever the comparator drug has to be administered in a complex situation, let's say with under the care of a doctor, that becomes a little more difficult. But if it is something in between that, one that a home study nurse or home health aide can do it, and you can gather data locally, then Blockcube could be a potential solution of choice also. And finally, at the end of the day, the pandemic is going to force us to rethink our core business processes. So it does make sense to relook at a workflow and see how much more we can give to the patient in this whole process. So the person becomes, the trial becomes more patient-centric than site-centric, even after the pandemic is over. So great responses. Thank you so much, audience, for that.
Very good. Thank you. Once again, thanks, Rama, for your nice presentation. Very informative and give us a very good insight. We have a couple of more questions, but before we take up those questions, I would encourage our audience to continue to type in the questions. Let us see a couple of a high-level overview of Cynozip, a couple of slides. If we can run through, that would be great. just talk about it briefly. Rama, can you
I'll
move
give
the
you back.
slides to the next?
Oh, okay. One moment. Sorry.
If you go to slide number 40.
Yeah, I'm going to slide down 40.
Perfect.
Here it is. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So,
yeah. Can you see it?
Yeah. I hope everybody is able to see it. So just a high-level overview of Cynozip. We're a 15-year-old company headquartered in Dallas, Texas, and we have presence in the Bay Area as well as in the New York City, Florida area. And we do agile software. We work as a co-development partner for startup to mid-sized companies, and we accelerate delivery of your product roadmap, technology roadmap using teams. Address any technology skill gaps in your in-house team. And with remote teams, there is guaranteed over 50% cost saving with the India-based software development talent. And we leverage US professionals who are based in the US, in Texas, Bay Area, as well as in the New York City area, to make it easy for your in-house team, in-house engineering team, or your on-site engineering team to collaborate with India-based Cynozip team to get the work done. So a good focused company to add value to customer projects continuously. So that is the sort of a high-level overview of Cynozip. Can you move to the next slide, Rama?
Yeah.
So in this slide, we are showing a representative list of clients, logos. So we work with some very good marquee companies. We continue to work and add value. We've been working with Google, Dell, and some of the names like PDX, that is basically based in Dallas in the pharma solutions. So overall, we've been working for multiple years with these companies and in adding value and acting as extended engineering team for customers. So with that, I want to thank the audience for typing the questions. Let us see a couple of more questions, Rama, if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So,
thank you.
Thank you. So are there any additional costs involved because of blockchain?
So the answer is that not necessarily. The reason is that it's a function of the design. So if we are designing something which has got, say, 2 nodes like we've done this, it's very light, simple, and agile. And it's a lot cheaper than existing solutions, because I know, having implemented SAP modules for accounting for clinical trials in my previous company. When you start going to 10,000 patients, etc., the design of it based on what the customer wants will become critical. But in its current structure, the answer is no.
Yeah. Okay. Another question, can Blockcube solution be brought on to an ongoing trial? Means assume a trial is already going on. Yeah. What happens to the already collected data to date?
So the answer is yes. So the way Blockcube operates is, it does not hang on to all the data. It sends the data out as a CSV file to whatever statistical package that you have. So the assumption is that in a current clinical trial, you're already using and exporting the data to, let's say, SPSS, SAS, or what have you. All that Blockcube will need to do is to recast the CRF into an eCRF, if it is a paper-based CRF, a case report form. Or if it is already an electronic one, we can try to figure out how we can import and build it together. Okay. That is the critical part of the whole process. And that is why we can offer a bridging solution at a time like this, so that you can still continue with your trials.
Okay. Thank you. And another question, there are many blockchain solutions available in the market today.
Right.
Are the clinical trial solutions available in the market today?
Right.
So in your application, can one blockchain be replaced with another blockchain if required based on the customer requirements?
So when we say blockchain, today at this stage, there isn't a convergence as yet, which will happen in the future with the way I see it. There isn't a convergence today between, let's say, Ethereum and Hyperledger, or R3 Coda and Hyperledger. Hyperledger already has got players like Intel, IBM, Microsoft, etc. So there is replaceability feasible, given its Hyperledger. It's less so with the others. So there's an explicit choice you need to make. One of the reasons why we chose what we did is that firstly, it was scalable. Secondly, it was controllable. We call it in blockchain speak a private permission ledger. Whereas if you start using open source software, my concern really was that when you go to a customer whose crown jewels is basically that developed clinical data, they're a little reluctant to trust an open source system like Ethereum all the way. Having said that, Ethereum has also built a ERP-driven system, and obviously the choice is made to use that would offer similar levels of comfort. Similarly, R3 Coda, I've read in the recent press, has been used by others who are doing other elements of a medical records. So once the choice is made, there is a degree at this stage, there is a degree of finality in the choice. But in the future, there will be a convergence of systems so that there's an interoperability feasible through that process.
Very good. Thank you. So one last question. Can you guess, or could you guess how much costs would be saved by using a system like yours?
So the first thing is that if you look at the complete cost structure of this, 26 to 30% are there in the site operations, what you see in operational management. We believe if you use our system the fullest extent with the financial module, because it cuts out reconciliation, etc., we can save up to 20 to 30%. Now, in this trial, for example, the protocol basically said that they want to do 850 patients, the data gathering in 12 months. We did the data gathering for 150 patients in 12 days. Now, even assuming we add on the software build time period of, say, roughly 6 weeks, and assume that the person had overestimated their time it take for the whole study, we can still do a comparison in 2 months and 6 months. And that's a huge amount of saving in terms of time and costs.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. And can you move to the last slide where you show the next webinar in the Cynozip webinar series? That would be helpful. Our next webinar is, thank you. So this is the upcoming webinar. API as a product is the topic, and that's going to be on July 30th, Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and will be presented by Rajiv Kaushik. He's a product manager at FIS FIS Global. Sorry. You'll see the information posted on Cynozip website. So please feel free to go and register. You can register there today. And finally, I want to thank Rama for taking time to come and present the topic about Blockcube and the product and solutions that has been built. And I want to thank the audience for taking time to attend this webinar. And I hope you got good value out of this, and we'll catch you in our next webinar series. And I want to thank you, and we'll sign off here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great rest of the day.
Great.